So back again. Now there's a lot that goes into that planning process to get to that detail that gives us our three solid detailed baselines. And so I'm referring now to back to those earlier slides, the first couple that have the planning process group. There's a lot of processes there, but not a lot of description in between, right? So I kind of have mirrored on the right what is from the PMBOK guide or other literature, which will drive detailed planning. On the left are kind of my notes, right? So first I want to start out by going, hey team, let's create a project plan, which is going to tell me how I'm in detail how I'm going to run this project in every knowledge area. So I'm going to start to put the team together. I won't have everybody, so I'm going to have to matrix out and use other team members. And now I'm going to list some detailed objectives which were in those business documents at the strategic level. And I'm going to start to review and build out I'm going to also then use the project charter, which lists some of them also kind of drilled down. Now I'm ready to discuss in an iterative process, right? None of this happens once and done. I'm going to start to look at my requirements. I mentioned they are progressively elaborated. I detail them out. I'm going to have to go out and collect all my requirements, which is why one of the first things we did in initiating after we built the charter was identify stakeholders, because now I want to define the stakeholders' needs in this project, which is going to help me define my scope statement. Then I'm going to decompose that scope statement into a work breakdown structure, right? Which is going to break down the major deliverables into manageable pieces called work packages, right? And it's going to help us in communications. It's going to help us in risk management and roles and responsibilities, right? It's going to help us prevent changes. And I can use the WBS as a basis for estimating, etc. Next, once my scope is done, I'm going to plan my schedule, right? Which means defining the activities in a list and then putting them in order called sequencing them. And that order's in a network diagram. And it's that point I get to understand their dependencies between these activities, right? What comes first, the chicken or the egg? There is a dependency there, right? Which is part of the fun of the joke, of the riddle. So we want to estimate how long each activity will take, all right, how many time periods, and that then is going to help us define the critical path along the schedule, which will then help us give us a final schedule, which becomes the schedule baseline. Now I'm ready to go back and use the WBS to add costs. Now that I have my resources and I have looked at resources and how much time each activity will take, and I have a schedule and I have my requirements, I'm going to go add costs to each work package. And I'm going to aggregate those costs from the bottom of my work packages on up to the scope statement in that hierarchy. After that, I'm going to ensure that quality, resource, and comms are all done and ready to go. In defining roles and responsibilities, I want to think about who needs training, who is at risk, right? Because they're junior in rank and maybe they have a very important role in this project, right? So I would want to tie some training or some supervision or other checks to minimize risk. Well, speaking of risk then, I want to identify all the risks and create a list. It's called a risk register. It's a list of the risks that I've identified. Then I will do qualitative analysis, which is just subjectively applying a score to them. And subjective can be good because it's by subject matter experts, so they know what they're talking about. It's not perfect. But the point to qualitative risk assessment is to take the risk register, that list of risks, and develop a prioritized order, right? Not all risks are equal. And so it's one thing to have a list of risks. It's another to prioritize them. Then for the highest priority risks, I will do a more detailed quantitative analysis, and that's called numeric. So qualitative is subjective, even though it's pretty accurate, and could use numbers. Quantitative is known as numeric because I'm going out and getting detailed numbers, market studies, and road traffic patterns if I'm putting in a new business somewhere, things like that, right? And then, of course, I want to plan risk responses, implement them, and monitor risks along the way. And then, of course, in planning, I want to make sure procurement is a risk to me. It always goes on the risk register, that list of risks. And so are assumptions. Assumptions always go on the risk register. These are things assumed true without proof. And then, of course, finalize the plan. Make sure that it is all integrated, that I don't have more schedule or requirements, scope, than I have cost or budget to manage them, right? Then I want to have a kickoff meeting. Yay, you've got to have a kickoff meeting and get underway, okay? Then the last but not least, in this week, we talk about risk management. Frankly, I started out by saying predictive or waterfall project management is risk-based, right? Because we've defined the details, even though we're going to progressively elaborate them along the way. And we want to control the output and to avoid the risks. So this is just kind of a summary of the processes. Number one is I want to plan risk management on the left. Then I want to identify the risks. So that's called... And so I want to identify all the individual risks. And then I even want to create risk categories, right? Because if I can group risks, I can probably group responses later. And I want to identify potential owners. And right away, we should jot down as a kicker what we think a potential response is going to be, even if we don't develop it later. Then after that, I will do qualitative risk analysis, which is taking probability times impact, right? And remember, this is subjective probability and subjective impact, but it's by a subject matter expert, so it's pretty good. And I can use color codes to define what are the highest risks, or I could even assign numbers to them, but it's still a subjective risk analysis using qualitative analysis. And you will always do qualitative analysis. You know why? It's about this right here, creating a risk ranking or priority order, so that I took the risk register in part 2, which is my list of risks, and now I have them in an order that's useful for me. Then I will do quantitative analysis, which is still probability times impact, but now it's numeric. These are substantive numbers that took time to dig up from studies, market research, etc. Then, of course, I want to plan risk responses for the biggest risks, right? And there are a number of responses. I only listed them here for threats, right? I could reduce the threat, avoid the threat, transfer the threat, or accept the threat. There are other responses for risk opportunities. Remember, risk isn't just a threat. Risk is also an opportunity according to project management. So if you've identified an opportunity, like maybe you can take advantage of a sale on lumber that is normally $4 a board to $1 a board. I might go out and take advantage of that opportunity and buy all the lumber now, and buy a tarp and put it under it so it stays dry, right? So if I can identify opportunities, those are risks too, but we want to take advantage of those. These are the responses for threats listed here. And then, of course, I want to implement my risk response when I see the risk being triggered, and I want to always monitor for risks. So that wraps up the substantive piece. I am going to take a short break, and then we will do the management and leadership portion of this.